Delightful Dissent. It's episode 52, and today I am talking to Victoria Matthews-Patel, who is a self-compassion coach, mentor, and author. Welcome to the show, Victoria. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Super. Today's assumption that we're going to be talking about is be authentic. And I've seen so many books and posts online and videos and everything talking about how authenticity is this key to success. You know, all you have to do is be authentic. And personally, I've never found it that simple. And I've also found really that getting stuck in the idea of what is authentic or what isn't authentic can be downright harmful sometimes and cause some real problems. So I'm really looking forward to exploring this further today. If you happen to be new to the show, Delightful Dissent is a shared exploration of really an idea that people kind of take for granted and a way of looking at that in a different way. And it's something that came up through my work with people who are taking pioneering different approaches to complex and tricky things. And Victoria is very much one of these people. It's really all about the hidden barriers, you know, these implicit beliefs and the deeper assumptions that can really trip us up sometimes. And it's us challenging those and exploring those and seeing how they work. So I hope this show can give you some specific ideas about things that you can challenge in your personal and professional life that can support you. But perhaps more importantly, I hope it can also give you some ideas about how you can go out there and challenge the assumptions that matter to you that are getting in your way as well. Because I'd like to see everyone be able to do this and this to be a normal part of everything that we do. And the show's called Delightful Dissent because, yeah, we are kind of, you know, saying, oh, I'm not sure I agree with that. It's not quite right. But, you know, we're not trying to prove ourselves right at the expense of everyone else. And we're having some fun and exploring and playing with these ideas rather than getting too stuck in everything. So it really is about joyfully exploring the possibilities, the other ways of thinking about things. And this show is genuinely live. So please do bear with us if there are any technical issues or anything happens in the background, any pets or anything happen to make their presence known. And also do be aware that we might be talking about personal and challenging topics that some people may find difficult. So if that is an issue for you, then please do be aware. And I would expect us to talk about some things around identity, self-identity, and self-expression today in particular. So if that's a challenge for you, then please just be aware that that's a possibility. There is also a possibility that we may use strong language. So if that is an issue for you, then also please be aware that that's a possibility. There aren't any perfect answers here. This is about exploring, asking questions of yourself and of others and of us. If you're watching live, then please do ask questions in the chat and we can bring them in and answer them as part of the show. If you're watching or listening to the recording, then we will share how you can get in touch with either of us and continue the conversation at the end of the show. So I was first introduced to Victoria a few months ago now, and we had a really lovely kind of first conversation. But I particularly admired her commitment to helping people succeed on their own terms and find their own forms of kind of success and ways of meeting really difficult things and finding these positive ways to address really quite significant, really tough problems. So I really wanted to get her on the show and to share that with everyone, with all of you. So, but I'd like to ask you, Victoria, if you could really introduce yourself, your work a little bit, and the kind of people you like to work with, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a self-compassion coach and mentor. My business is called With Compassion. And my work is all about getting people to really think about their relationship with themselves, and to be aware that your relationship with yourself can change. But a significant challenge that comes with that work is that often your view of yourself isn't something that comes from within you. You may have heard it from other people in your past. It could be a societal expectation. And you may not be fully aware of what you're doing in terms of how you're treating yourself. So I'm all about working with people and getting them to see their value, because unless you see your own value, you're always going to be thinking about other people. It's all about, what does the external world think of me? So the real crux of my work is working with a client to get to know themselves and to establish a relationship with themselves, and to realize that your relationship with yourself is the most important in your life. The person you spend the most time with is yourself. But how much time and attention do you actually give to yourself?
Thank you. I think it's really, really important work, and particularly for those of us who experience things in a slightly different way, as I do, and much of the audience does. It's not something we necessarily get handed to us by default. And I think that so being able to work with that and helping people with that is really, really wonderful. So thank you. Could you maybe tell us how did you come to doing this particular work? What brought you to wanting to work this way?
Okay, so my background is in education. I started as an early years teacher, and I found myself being drawn to the children who either didn't feel like they fit within the class or within the school, or who perceived themselves as struggling. And I found myself always wanting to develop a relationship with them where they saw their value and where they didn't just see negativity. And then I trained as a dyslexia specialist and worked for 17 years within the charity sector within dyslexia. And then I got very ill in 2018 and had a breakdown, actually. And basically, I've been on I would say, coming on to 4-year journey of discovery, of really getting to know myself. And I can see, looking back, that every job I took, I was looking to give value to a person or to the people. Whoever I worked with, I wanted them to believe in themselves. But what I really realized is I didn't see my own value. So that's what I've worked on in the last 4 years, is I'm important too. Because I put it out there. It was like, I don't want anyone to feel like I do, but I don't think I actually consciously knew I wasn't seeing my own value. So it was only when I got really ill and sort of sought therapy and support that I realized actually that my concept of self was so poor. And I've been on a huge learning curve and have learned a lot. I've changed incredibly. And I now really see that true value in me. And for the audience, it's you are the one that you need to focus on, not all the sort of periphery, I call it. And I think we get so pulled into how we appear to other people. Hence the topic authenticity. It's who am I? I didn't know who I was, and I've been on a discovery of who I am, and I now confidently know who I am. But it's taken a lot of hard work to get there. But my goodness, it's incredible when you get there.
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, how much I resonate with that story, and thank you for sharing it. It's a really challenging thing when for me, I kind of realized, well, I'm not that. Then what am I?
Yeah.
And that was the really difficult question, is, when you don't quite fit into the categories, you have this very difficult choice of either squeezing into them very uncomfortably or kind of bouncing out of them completely. And both of them are really, really tough.
And for me, it's really interesting, because what I've discovered quite recently actually is that I've often been put into a box. I haven't put myself into a box necessarily, but all my life I've been trying to push out of the box. So it's like I push out, I get pushed back in. I push out, I get, and it's that constant. And now I'm just like, the box isn't there anymore. There is no box. I will not be put into a box.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting one. And I think because it's so apt, I'd like to take us into the quote that you'd like to share, please. I always ask guests for a quote to kind of start us off on the exploration. So if you'd like to share what you brought along, please.
Okay, so my quote, it's incredibly powerful, is from the French philosopher Michel Foucault, and it's, "Do not ask who I am, and do not ask me to remain the same." And it's oof, I could feel it. It's like whoa, that's an incredible quote. I think it's just so huge and so powerful. Yeah.
And I think for me, similarly, how does it relate? How do you feel it relates to this idea of authenticity for you?
For me, it's a huge awareness of, there isn't one version of us. We are not we are one person, but we are multifaceted and we're individual. And a huge aspect of when I worked in education was to see every child as an individual. So even if, for example, in a maths group, you had your middle set, within that middle set, you had the one who was almost in the top group and you had the one who was almost in the lower group. So it was very much for me about not grouping people together and just going, well, you're that. Because we're all multifaceted. We're so many things, and we're different things in different situations. So for me, again, it's that feeling I described of being put into a box and pushing out is almost how I feel when I read this, "Just be yourself," or, be authentic. But we change and we evolve, and I'm not a static person. I'm changing. I might start this conversation a bit anxious, but within 10 minutes, I'm joyous and flowing. And by the end, I could feel something else completely different. So even within this hour conversation, you could see different versions of me, because it's, I guess, how I adapt to a situation, but it's also how emotionally safe I feel in a situation, or whether I feel there is an expectation, sort of like a weight, an expectation placed on me that, well, I've got to be this today. My professional Victoria is turning up. I can't be me. So I think it's just that fluidity that I think we miss in so many aspects of life. Is that it's this narrowness of like living in black and white, and where's this vibrant range of colors? We're not just one thing or a few labels. We are many, many things, and we are individual, and we are absolutely unique.
And I love the fact that you brought in the fact that we're not fixed. We're a dynamic process.
Yeah.
The identity and how we are in the world is a flowing thing. Yeah. It changes both for internal change reasons and in different contexts.
And also, I would add to that, sorry, that it's, I mean, the me that you see today is also dependent on how I'm feeling mentally today. I mean, if I had, let's say, for example, a very difficult morning, felt frazzled, it would be a different version of me. And I think there's almost like a pressure to be something. And if we can just allow people to be who they are in that moment, then there is that flow.
Absolutely. I don't know. I definitely feel that pressure, certainly very much in a professional context. One of the interesting things about doing this show is that I show up every time at a specific time, and I don't really have the option of, unless something's really serious, of choosing exactly how I am going to feel for the show. So the energy that I have, the way I am, can differ quite significantly between episodes, and with different people and with different topics as well.
Yeah, well, it's your safety around that person, isn't it? It's like you get a connection. You feel a connection, or possibly you don't, and then that changes who you are in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's such a strange thing to be in public that way as well, because you don't have that. I completely agree, and I think those of us who feel this perhaps to a strong degree, it's partly because we are so skilled at adapting. If we weren't so skilled at adapting, probably wouldn't be such a challenge on some level. But we've learned, for whatever reason, that we had skills in that space, or we were in environments that led us to develop them to a high degree, or a bit of both, more likely. That it can be really, really hard, because I've found in my own experience, and a lot of people, I kind of over adapt. It's like I'll be everything someone else needs, without and in doing so I'll lose sight of my own needs, and that's not sustainable.
And it's not sustainable, but it's also exhausting, because you're constantly thinking, okay, who am I going to be with? What is the situation? And it's that weight of almost like that overthinking of, okay, what does that person want of me? What version of me works for that person? And it doesn't just come from us. I mean, through my life, I've been told by various different people that I am right or wrong, or I'm this or I'm that. So I've got a lot of experience of being sort of put in a box, or almost being told I don't fit. And of course you're going to internalize that. And it's having compassion with yourself about all the external stuff that's created that anxiety. But then it's that pressure of, who do I morph myself into today to be accepted, or not to stand out? Because sometimes it can be we want to be accepted. Sometimes it can be I don't want any attention. We can come to it with different motives almost every day. And it's that, if you think about it, when we go somewhere, that expectation and pressure that we're putting on ourselves before we've even got there, possibly because we've been sent a message before that you don't fit in this situation. I mean, for example, I've been, you struggle socially, don't you? Now, to hear that when you are socializing is not great.
It's not supportive at all.
It's almost like I'm trying to fit in. Don't tell me that I struggle, because now you've put the spotlight on me going, well, everyone knows I struggle and nobody's looking at me. It's my own spotlight that I'm putting on. But because that person said that one comment that took me back to, I stand out socially, what do I need to do to fit in?
It's one of the interesting things around, what do we mean by fit in, and with whom? And it's one of those really challenging perspective things where, certainly in my work around neurodiversity, is very often, you'll see literature that says whatever group of neurodivergent people, so people with ADHD or autistic people, struggle to socialize with their peers. But if you actually dig into it, that's not entirely true.
No.
What it means is that people with, so autistic people, for example, often struggle to socialize with their neurotypical peers. They don't typically struggle to socialize with other autistic people. And equally, those neurotypical people struggle to socialize with their autistic peers. So it's a two-way thing. But if
Mm.
you are different in some
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
it all ends up on you. And I
Yes.
think this is one of the really difficult things that we can kind of internalize. You know, we almost take a whole systemic problem around, and where that relates to authenticity, I think for me is it's like the continuation of the problem of being problematized
Mm.
almost becomes part of that authentic identity, that ongoing identity.
Yeah.
And that means you can never resolve it. And that's a
Mm.
real trap that
Mm.
I've certainly struggled with myself.
Well, it's interesting. Two things came up for me there. And one is for me, was an incredibly powerful visual. I love sort of a visual to look at that helps me sort of work out myself, I suppose. And it was basically, there was a visual of, trying to, when you're a child playing with those blocks, and it was trying to put a round block in a square hole. And it's it's never going to fit. It's literally never going to fit. And if we're going out every time going, I'm trying to fit, life becomes a challenge and difficult and exhausting. But something else that came up is a couple of weekends ago, I spent a weekend with some incredible friends, and some neurodivergent, some neurotypical. It worked brilliantly. And I think I think there's a lot around emotional safety. So people that you feel safe enough when you're around them to say, this place is a bit loud for me, or I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, or, I prefer to go to a restaurant, I don't like the mingling thing. And I think it's not just neurodivergence, neurotypical, it's being with people you can be yourself with. And I think that's when I spent a weekend with these people, and I didn't need to make an effort. I was just joyfully me, and could speak up and say, there's no way I can go in there, it's far too loud. So I think for me, a lot of it is about getting the confidence to speak and say, I struggle with this. And empowered people will understand and will not want you to feel that you are in a place that's challenging for you. So I think there's a lot about the people that you spend your time with. And that's what I've learned a lot in my healing work over the last few years, is spending time with people who you feel incredible with and you can be absolutely yourself with. And there's such a power in that. And I don't think we always, again, pay a lot of attention to our emotional energy when we're around people. Because once you start connecting with your emotional energy, it's like, God, I feel amazing when I'm talking to this person. And then, I've noticed my energies have dipped. What's that about? What is it? And just exploring that is really quite interesting and quite exciting, actually.
Yeah, I think, when we do talk about the bits that we learn to disconnect because we can't be our whole selves. And I think it's really important to say that, we learn this because it is genuinely unsafe very often. It's not that it's a mistake in the sense that for some reason we just hadn't had the idea. It's much more that we will have been in situations in the past where we will have been that kind of less filtered, more our whole selves, and suffered for it, and been experienced rejection or got into trouble or a whole load of different things. Where we will have experienced a significant amount of pain associated with that.
Absolutely.
And we'll have learned, if I want to avoid the pain, I can't be this way. And so that, and when I say learned, I should say we will have been taught that. And so and I want to say, even as as an adult, I still find myself in situations where I am very clear it's not safe to be my full self.
Yes.
And so it's not the case that we can just be like full everything all the time if we are different. I suspect not having a conventional way of experiencing the world, I don't know, but from the way that some other people talk about it, I suspect some people can be that pretty much all the time if they are pretty conventional in an awful lot of ways, if they're not a member of any marginalized groups or minority groups. But if you are in any minority at all, there's a much lower chance that that's always a possibility.
And I think I read something interesting last week, which was, why are neurodivergent people expected to fit into a neurotypical world? Imagine if we said to a neurotypical person, you need to adapt to us. And it almost feels like the pressure's always on. I've never liked the different label and the normal label. I just think there's so much danger and lack of safety in that, and if we could almost just go, we are all individual, we all bring something else to the table. It's like, I don't want to be told I'm this, so therefore I am this, because we're all different. So for example, in the dyslexia world, I always used to say, look, every dyslexic child and adult is different. They all come up with, they all have their own personality, their own individuality, their own sets of skills, strengths, challenges. And it's not just seeing somebody as one thing.
Yeah, I think that the danger of, when we're talking about authenticity, the danger of labels, both for how we behave, how we think of ourselves, and how other people think of us, the internalized limits. So if I think of myself as a condition, for example, and there's a famous saying, when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. That is really important when we're talking about any category. And this idea of like authentically a category is really difficult. And it's also difficult if we become known as having that condition. So one of the difficulties I work with knowingly is that in some of my work I actively declare my lived experience of neurodivergence to largely neurotypical audiences.
Right.
But one of the things that I really regularly try and make as clear as possible is that my experience of the world may have very little in common to someone else who also is the same member of that neuro minority.
Yes.
And that's where this authenticity is like, it's like, it can be really difficult, because if you're, it's like, well, you should do this because you're X. It's like, no.
Or I didn't expect you to be able to do this because.
You should not be. That gets even more difficult if you're highly, I primarily work with highly able neurodivergent people. And the number of people who have been told you can't be this because you can do that. That is really problematic. And that can then end up internalized too.
It's pushing you back into that box again. It's like you're trying to be expansive and open and see the possibility, and everyone else is going, oh no, but you're that.
I often think about it, it's like, and that is true in that context, but that's not the only thing that's going on.
Yes.
And that's often, so there's both the fact that the sometimes the preconceptions are downright wrong, and they're just incorrect. And then there's this idea that like, that's true to a point, but that's not the point right now.
Yes. And I think it's very difficult. I mean, if you add in as well that you are a highly sensitive person, it can take, you could have done a lot of work on, getting to know yourself, and it can take one comment and it'll take you right back to that feeling of, I'm not emotionally safe here. It is not safe to be me. And whatever was the cause of that lack of safety, whether it's, you know, something that happened in childhood or another traumatic event, or one comment that somebody has made that has made you go, there's something inherently wrong with me. It's really hard. And I thought, really, just a general disclaimer is, it's not easy to get to know yourself. And this is why I get really quite cross with this sort of toxic positivity online, which is just be yourself. And in fact, I was just saying to my daughter before this call, I said, if it was that easy, we wouldn't need to be told to do it. We would just do it. You know, it's like, you can't just be yourself, because there's so many expectations and different situations, and, you know, we turn up in different ways in different circumstances. So I don't ever want to make it feel like this is easy, but it's absolutely possible.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. One of my former guests shared the idea that the word just is often used in those circumstances as a synonym for with extreme difficulty.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think
all of these should have a disclaimer underneath. I mean, it's almost you know, it's, you want to write something that goes, this is the statement, these are all the things that you need to be aware. I mean, for example, that to be yourself, you've got to be self-aware. You know, that's the first statement, is how self-aware are you? But then also, can you acknowledge yourself? You know, never mind like and love yourself. Can you acknowledge who you are and your various traits and characteristics? Then can you accept them? Only then can you think, well, I can maybe start to embrace who I am. So there's so many points to work through to get to that turn up as your authentic self.
And you know, as we've said, it's not even a fixed thing. So there's this kind of ongoing, but and there are things, you know, where you certainly a lot of people I work with in my own experiences of adult diagnosis of neurodivergence, and it's like that itself is a lot to work with. You know, it's like, oh, this thing I thought about myself, you know, how I thought about myself actually changes, and it's whilst it's in some ways it's very liberating, and some people find it extremely helpful. I found that there was a lot of grief and a lot of regret that came up as a result of that. You know, the idea, well, if I had known this, and that, I think, you know, when we're talking about self-exploration in any form, whether we're talking about through the lens of psychology or psychiatry, or whether we're talking about, you know, in self-development or whatever, actually it can be significant emotional work to discover these things and process these things. And they can have implications for so much of our lives, you know, how we work, who we're with, our close family relationships, all sorts. And the idea that, like, when people say just be authentic, and it's like, well, if there's all that between me and what you mean by authentic, then who are you to tell me to do all that right now?
Yes. And it's not, and add to that, then you then become somebody who really has to think about, how do I show up today, rather than just showing up. So it's almost like an extra pressure.
Yeah, it almost feels like self-justification. You know, I think that, you know, and I have a reflexive need to self-justify that I've learned, and I'm slowly trying to unlearn. Because it's that thing of like, well, you didn't quite fit, so it didn't quite make sense. And if I can't make sense of why that didn't quite work, then I'm going to make that your problem. And so I kind of preemptively deal with that by self-justification. And it feels related to this idea of like partially fitting in a box. And I think this is one of the other really big difficult things around, you know, when we worry about the need to be authentic, is when we're misread.
Yes. Yes. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because everything you were saying, it's that visual again of we're trying to expand ourselves, and then it's almost like this constant ebb and flow of, you know, fitting in, which is the narrow, and then being allowed to be ourselves. And it's almost like we can never be fully just ourselves. We've got to it's almost like a dimmer switch. We have to tone ourselves down for certain people, or almost make an excuse for ourselves. It's like we can't just be us. It's almost like the world sends us messages that we're just a bit too much. Just tone yourself down so I can cope with you. So for some people we might be too much. For some people we're not enough. And it's
that I was going to say exactly that. That's one of the real challenges. Is sometimes the same person in the same situation, which is even harder. And I experience this. I mean, the easiest way to explain this to people, I think, is at school. Is my experiences at school, where I was, some things I find easier than most other people. Some things I find harder than most other people.
Yes. Yeah.
For neurotypical people, they tend to like all the things you find easy and hard are quite close to one another almost by definition. But for neurodivergent people, you get this thing called a spiky ability profile, which is that you're very good at some things and very not so good at other things.
Yes.
And so I would be either ahead or behind of the class all the time, and I got punished for both. Oh. And the really frustrating thing is, like, if I can get ahead in the bits I'm quick at, then I don't have to worry when I'm slow because I've got more time. But I wasn't allowed either. Yeah. So the whole thing was I was always kind of under this pressure to perform in a certain way, to limit and to kind of do things that were really, really hard for me. And that was exhausting. And so as an example of what I mean, what we mean by being too much and not enough at the same time, I think that's because it's a slightly difficult concept to explain if you haven't necessarily experienced it.
And a lot of it, I think, comes down to we sort of shape shift or morph ourselves into a version of ourselves that person can cope with, that person is happy with. And at school, it's a constant, it's a constant thing of fitting in that subject, or I either like something or I don't like something. So if I was in a subject I really liked, I loved it. If I was in a subject I didn't like, completely switched off. Completely different versions of the same person.
Yeah, I have very limited capacity to pay attention to things that I don't find intrinsically interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
Very limited capacity.
And also I have a daughter just about to leave the education system, and I would say things haven't particularly changed hugely. It's the same subjects. We're back to exams again. We went away from coursework back to exams, and it's that everything we've talked about today. It's all this sort of movement and flow and ease, and again, I don't think we've got that still. It's that fit into this education system, and if you don't fit, that's for you to deal with almost.
Yeah, and I think in some ways it's the work situation, and I primarily work in the space of workplaces and work, is kind of oddly similar. We almost have this hangover from this. We have this need for organizations people talk about innovation and like change and adaptation and flexibility, and then when we come to it, we ask people to almost do the opposite.
Yes.
To kind of fit into, so we're taught through school that the way that we're going to be successful is to kind of, meet these goals, do this, and then everything will be fine. And then organizations actually operate in a very similar way. It's like, okay, we just pass the exam, i.e. meet the project criteria or whatever it is, meet our goals.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the same, get the pass mark.
Yes.
And everything else will take care of itself.
And again, it's a rigidity, isn't it? It's that rigid.
Reality.
It's just not. Yeah, reality isn't rigid. Yeah. Yeah.
And for those of us, I think when we are in this strange situation of fitting in and not fitting in at the same time, which is a different experience to either completely fitting in or either completely not fitting in.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it has advantages that neither has, but it has disadvantages that neither have as well. And so it's a unique space, and I think we have a particular awareness and role to be able to do this kind of connecting up work.
Absolutely.
But that we are denied very often because of this kind of, you can't have, it's like, it's a real challenge, when we get in these situations where it's just like we disconnect from the wider context and just assume we can do the thing. And when we do that collectively, we don't do anyone any favors.
And it's interesting. I'm back to that box visual again. Is we want to think outside the box, but we've been pushed back in the box. It's like, let us have, give you an idea of a different way this could work. Oh, and it's almost like, oh no, that's too much. Let's go back to that box that we're comfortable with.
So I think it would be interesting to have a think about, if we're going to give, I would like to, first of all, to talk to people who resonate with what we're talking about in terms of the not fitting in, struggling with this concept of authenticity. How could someone who's resonating with what we're saying and thinking they might want to explore some of this, what might they, well, first of all, what might they want to play with letting go of a little bit? What might they not want to worry about quite as much, and explore if they can do something different?
Again, I'm going to start with, this is a challenge, but I think one of the most crucial things is to try and almost close off that external noise and expectation and focus on you. So the work I do is all about the client. So it's you and getting to know you, not what other people want from you, but who you are. Sort of, what floats your boat, what makes you joyful. So for example, it could be a very simple thing that you could do quite easily, is just to really think about a time when you felt really happy and comfortable, and just think about that situation and what was it about that situation that made you feel that way, and connecting within. Because I think part of this thing about trying to fit and trying to belong is that we can actually disconnect from not just our minds, we disconnect from our bodies. And it's about getting to know ourselves and sensations within our bodies and listening to our bodies. And so if we can think about a time where we were joyful, so for example, for me, it could be this, weekend 2 weeks ago. And believe me, it's taken me to my early 50s to do something like that. I would, be fearful of getting lots of people. I would never instigate it myself because of this. Oh, what if people say no? Maybe I won't belong. Maybe I won't fit. So it's taken a lot of work for me to go, oh, I can do this. I can go away with a group of people and really love it, because it would have just been too much anxiety before. But it's about just going, okay, when I was in that moment, how did I feel? And I know that I wasn't in here. I wasn't in my head. And I have a very overactive mind. I'm always thinking about, I'm always looking for elements that might make me feel unsafe, for example. I'm looking for people that I think, oh no, I don't fit with that person. There's always it's almost like I've got a radar for protection. But at this weekend, I was the me that I've learned about in the last few years. And now when I look back, it's like, some friends who've seen photos just went, there's pure joy in your face. And it was that joy, it was an ease, there was a flow. So it's all about thinking of a time where you felt good and what was it about it? So it's actually about looking at things in your life and sort of analyzing them and learning from them and going, well, I want more of that. Now, I know we can't always choose. We may be in work situations where we have to deal with somebody who we, don't feel we connect with. But I think the more we can learn about us as a person by getting to know you, it's the first step. It's just being aware of, this is me in a good, happy place where I am not worried about how I'm being perceived or whether I fit, even if it's for 10 minutes. What was it in those 10 minutes? What was it? And then really think about, okay, just be aware of how you feel around people. And then a separate thing, and it's actually, I'm a journaler and a scrapbooker. It's really about, I actually made myself a scrapbook about me. Now, to some people, that'd be like, my goodness, she's egocentric. But it wasn't. It was all about me getting to know myself, because I'd completely lost myself to everyone else. It's a, what does everybody need from me? So I just started this scrap, and it was I am. And I would just add to it when words came into my head of, this is who I am, not what others want. This is about me.
I think it's such a helpful thing. One of the challenges with particularly the authentic joy is, for a lot of people, certainly in my experience, I really did struggle to answer that question. I couldn't have sincerely answered that question a few years ago. For me then, I could have said things that were true a while ago.
And I think that's okay. Even if the happiness is when you were 5, what was it? What was it about that moment that made you feel good?
And I think it's true, but it's quite difficult to operationalize. It's quite difficult to turn. It's like, I can't exactly do the same thing, or maybe exactly the same thing doesn't still continue to bring me joy. But it does provide us with some direction, and being able to kind of connect with that and experience that and experience. Actually, for me, I think it's one of the really big challenges is I learnt a long time ago, I was taught a long time ago, I should say again, that there were the things that I valued and enjoyed, and there were things that other people valued and approved of, and that those were two separate things, two completely separate domains. So I couldn't really share, and I couldn't, I think there's something about enjoyment that's very much shared, actually. And so I either had my own kind of personal pursuits that could only really be mine, or the things that other people valued. And that continued into how I thought about work. So I took that forward into to working, and it was like, okay, there's the stuff I do for work, and then there's the stuff I enjoy, and they're separate, like quite a margin. That for me was a lot of what underlied the burnout that I experienced. It wasn't, I wasn't meeting those intrinsic needs as well as the extrinsic needs. So I had this horrible tension between trying to meet the two. And it feels like what we're, when we're resolving this or trying to work with this, we're talking about finding things in an intersection, which might mean finding different people too.
Absolutely.
So it might mean finding different groups of people and experiencing that, and that it's an iterative process. It's not, we can't go all the way there. That's the other thing about authentic, is it's like there's an ongoing process of discovery here. I'm not sure you ever finish, even however much
No.
So to say, okay, I'm done. I know what I am. I know exactly how I am, and this is true now and will forever be. I'm not sure that's true of anyone, and that's particularly not true of those of us who have not, who don't well fit into standard categories at all. So I think it's a really, really helpful thing to kind of to not worry about so much, is that we're not solving it And the other
Yeah.
really helpful tip that you shared there that I found really useful is to give yourself an expressive outlet in some way that feels
Yeah.
kind of fun and free,
Yeah.
that is not, people have talked about things being just for you. I've actually found that I'm like, if I do just for me, I have like, I have expectations. I have
Yes.
expectations. I have things
Mm.
it's not even that. It's like, it's literally, I will sit here and I will see what I do. I will
Yeah.
see what I write without any expectations, just so
Yeah.
it comes out. And
Mm.
it's a slightly different thing. So just a slight
Yeah.
reframing that I found helpful in that, but completely, I think it's so helpful to find a thing where you can just be.
Yeah. And the big point there is to find what works for you, because I think it's very easy to go, well, this worked for me, so therefore you should do it. I mean, I don't like the word should. It's not everything that says should is, but
Yeah.
it's find what works for you. Find it could be creative, it could be physical, whatever it is, but I think 3 words that were said to me about 2 years ago, which was open your mind, because I had allowed sort of society and, various people in my life to close me down almost. I limited myself and I wasn't doing anything for myself in the end. And it's all about just, if you have the confidence, when you feel comfortable, just try something different. And actually, in the last 3-4 years, I've started doing things that I never would have done before. And I found people that I possibly never would have connected with before, because I now realize that I wasn't connecting with the right people for me. But when you find those people, cherish them and nurture those relationships. And it could be for various reasons. It could be something you picked up in childhood, is that there's something inherently wrong with you, so you need to be something else, or that you sort of become a different version of you to make sure everything at home is okay. So whatever the reason is for not fitting, I guess it's just taking the pressure off yourself, trying to connect with you, like just to establish a relationship with yourself. And, it's not about loving yourself. There's so many more steps before you get there. That's another sort of toxic thing that I think is so damaging, but it's just getting to know you, become aware of you and what you like. And something you talked about, Matthew, it's all about getting to know your values. What drives you? What do you love? Because it's something that maybe a lot of people haven't really thought about before, because there's so much expectation on being this for that person or being this for somebody else's. Actually, what do you like? What's important to you, not what other people think is important, what's important to you. So when I work with a client, I would do work on values, but it's all about the client.
And I think for me, it's been really interesting, when we talk about these processes, I had misunderstood, partly because of the way that they were presented, how I could do this work. When we say do these things, is I don't directly do any of these things. This is one of the weird things, is I've found that really what I think of by doing the work is clearing the space for the thing to emerge. So I create the situation where it can arise, or not, if it doesn't want to that day, rather than being like, I need to do this. And so creating that opportunity where it can come about in its own way, because I won't know, because I've never seen it before. So, or not in, I certainly can't remember. So how do I know what I'm looking for? And that's partly how I deal with that, is because it's like, well, it's a bit like creating a clearing and seeing what comes into the clearing, rather than being like, well, I know there's some wonderful creatures out there that I want to encounter. But I don't know exactly what they are, so I don't know how to. I can't go out and get one. so what I do is I instead create a situation where it can kind of come in instead. And I just want to add, just before we kind of start to wrap up really briefly, if someone else is in the situation where they're with someone and that they want to support the other person in this kind of this enterprise, that where until maybe listening to this show they would have said, oh, you just need to be authentic. How can they more helpfully support someone else in this process?
For me, it's all about, I mean, I think before I directly answer that question, what I do want to get across is the importance of self-worth, because if we don't see ourselves as valuable, we're not going to be able to do this work. Because, for example, I mean, it's like having boundaries around certain, social situations, etc. But if you don't see your own self-worth, you're not going to see yourself as worthy of speaking up for yourself, for example, never mind assert a boundary. So it's a lot about, and this is where where it has to start, is getting the individual to, and it takes time and it takes work, but to value themselves, to see their own value. And I think once you can see your own value, then you can talk to somebody else and explain why this is an issue. But I think a lot of the difficulties that people like us experience is we don't always see our value. We've always been taught to almost hide away, or definitely not speak our truth, because the person either can't cope with it or is uncomfortable with it. But if you are with somebody that you can speak to, it's, I guess, explaining that authenticity is, it's a big thing. We don't want to be put into a box. We don't want to say, I'm this, I'm that. It's like, I could have started this conversation with, I'm Victoria, I'm ... And obviously my job title is a label, which we have to have. But for me, it's all about that person getting to know you and finding out who you are. And I think sometimes we almost, I mean, I'm speaking personally here, so I will often preempt something by labeling myself. So I'll go in and almost explain myself, well, I'm quiet, or I struggle here, and so it
almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy too, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes. So it's that awareness of how you are about yourself. So how you treat yourself, but how you talk about yourself to other people. And often, because of the way we've been treated, we can sometimes give ourselves labels, because it's like, oh, well, I can justify my existence to that, or my behavior around that person by saying, oh, well, I'm quiet, or I don't like social things. Whereas a fuller explanation would be, I'm actually really quite sociable in the right environment. So if I'm in a restaurant and can eat and can chat to friends and I can hear myself, I'm as sociable as anything. I'm not sociable if you put me in a really loud, busy, noisy environment where there is an expectation for me to mingle. So yes, I'm sociable, but in different contexts.
I think in some ways then, expressing the complexity, the subtlety of our experience, of our labels. And if we're talking about people who want to support others' authenticity, who want to encourage others in their authenticity, then allowing them that as well, supporting them in that feels like a really big step towards helping people really be able to be the full, multifaceted. And multifaceted is an interesting one. I came across this. There's another. So it sounds like a gemstone, which is great, and I like the metaphor. But I also found that some gemstones have a quality called polychromism, which is that they look different colors in different light.
Yeah.
And I think for me that, that's almost,
Brilliant.
that feels like a
Yeah.
more apt metaphor and why it's so difficult.
It does.
Because it's like, okay, you're looking at this facet, but we're looking at with the light in a different angle, so now it looks blue instead of red. And
Yeah.
that feels like, where if we can allow that and support
Yes.
that in
Yes.
ourselves and others,
Mm.
then we can actually do, we can really move that kind of,
Yes.
we can allow
Yeah.
this process to unfold more fully.
Can I just, I hope you can see it, but I printed this off the internet, which is, you are not one thing, you are so much more. And that ties in exactly with what you said about that range of colors. So for example, in this conversation today, I might feel like a whole range of colors. Another day I might feel, if I'm unsafe, sorry, I can't get there. If I'm unsafe, I'm that, it's like that's it. I'm
just one, so it's from a whole range of a whole multiplicity of colors and shapes to just being a single color and a single shape.
Yeah, and I mean that's new Happy Co on Instagram. I just thought that was so powerful because, and I might turn up as green and yellow for somebody. I might turn up as blue and purple. It's allowing ourselves to be free with people and to know that we can be, even when we feel comfortable with ourselves, and we're always evolving and changing. I know myself now, but I also know I'm going to change. And I can't wait for that. It's like, where's this world going to take me now? Because I have the confidence now to meander and flow.
Yeah, and I think because it's such a daunting thing to ask people to do, to know that is what sits the other side of it, a kind of, I struggle with the word, because confidence is a word I find slightly difficult myself for reasons that I don't really want to descend too much into right now, because for time reasons.
Yeah.
But I think, that sense of ongoing self-assurance, that sense of the fact that I can cope with stuff that I don't yet know and haven't yet encountered, and I can, and more so that I believe I will find ways to enjoy it. As the thing that comes from having engaged with all this difficult stuff, or one of the things that comes, I think it's a really, it's a really helpful thing to anchor on why you might even do this in the first place.
Yeah. And for me, it's all about, when you work with a client, it's about meeting the person where they're at. So with me, you've met someone who was, rock bottom and who has done a lot of work, but we meet the client where they're at, where they're at in this moment, and work. I guide the client to where they want to be, because we all have slightly different wants and needs when we come to a coach. But it is that the aim is for the person to, confidence is not what we're aiming for. I mean, if you end up being confident, that's fantastic, but it's really about being compassionate with every aspect of you. Because when we've heard all this external stuff about not fitting or not belonging, or we've heard somebody say something to us, it's very easy to turn that on ourselves. And for me, the beginning step to any work is self-compassion. It's treating yourself well, treating every trait of yourself with compassion. And speaking from a personal viewpoint, I was bullying myself as to, why can't you do this? Everyone else finds it easy. Why can't, what's wrong with you? Was literally the sort of ongoing repetition in my head is, everyone else is finding it easy here, you're not. There's something wrong with you. Now, I have no idea now what was going on in anyone else's head, but it was that level of self-loathing. But by bringing self-compassion to every aspect of you, and that can take time, because there'll be bits of you that you may not like, but it's bringing self-compassion to it and getting an understanding of why you are the way you are, what's happened to you in the part. I mean, a therapist would take you through your past, but as a coach, it's like, we get an understanding of why you are behaving this way. Something's happened to make you behave that way, and what it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you.
I think it's such an important, that shift from blame to responsibility, in the sense of the ability to respond.
Yes.
It's like there is no one to blame.
No.
It isn't a helpful concept.
No.
But that doesn't mean that if you would like to do something to change it, you can. And that in doing that, you are not accepting blame. So I think it's such a wonderful thing, and thank you for giving the opportunity, and that meeting people where they are. I think as a summary of this whole thing is meeting yourself where you are, and meeting others where they are.
And I think
instead of trying to be authentic all the time.
Yes. And I think sometimes if you hear somebody like me speak, you'd be like, well, I can't get there. So it's very much about the, I will never diminish the fact that this was 3 or 4 years of work. I mean, I had other issues that I had to deal with aside from this, within therapy, but it's about just one step at a time, and being compassionate with yourself every step of the way, and seeing yourself as valuable and important. And often we don't see ourselves as valuable and important, and that's really what I want to get across, is that you are important, and you deserve your place in the world. You deserve to do what you want to do, not what you think that you should do because your world's been closed to you.
And I think also that our unique traits, which are often what gives us difficulty, that they are also the foundation of unique talent and unique value, and that is the other part of it. There is a value for others in us doing this stuff. We actually increase what we offer to other people as well.
Absolutely.
So it's not, it is by no means a selfish act. In fact, it is an immensely generous act, partly because it also opens up the opportunity for others to do the same. So thank you so much. I think it's such an important conversation, and an invitation for people to do this, and to let go of the idea of a fixed way of being and the need to find one. If people would like to find out a bit more about you and your work, we have a link to your website and to your LinkedIn.
Great.
Is there anything else that you'd like to, I think you mentioned you have a Facebook page as well, which people can find on your website. Is that right?
Yes. So if you go to my website, there are links to Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So I'd be very happy to connect.
And is there anything else? Do you have any? Do you have anything coming up, or anything that people might be interested in, or anyway other things that people might want to engage with you about? Or
well, I offer a self-compassion coaching program, which at the moment is 1-to-1, but obviously can be adapted to the individual, because all my work is about the uniqueness of each person I work with. It's about getting to know the person. But I am also planning in the future to run a peer support group, because the value of peer support in people just being able to say, this is me, this is who I am, and with people who get you. It's all about, when you're with the right people, it makes such a difference. And maybe you haven't found those people yet, and peer support can be incredibly powerful. So that's something I'm going to be doing in the future. But yes, if you'd like to come, I offer a self-compassion mentoring program, but I also offer coaching, which is absolutely tailored to you, where we get to know you. And that's the important thing. It is you. You are the most important person.
Wonderful. Thank you. I thank you so much for joining us on the show and for sharing all of this. I really appreciate, your time and sharing this and simply for doing the work and creating this invitation. I think it's such an important thing, not just for the individuals, but because I genuinely believe that for a lot of people who fall into this category, that their unique talents are valuable to everyone.
Absolutely.
And that it serves no one that they're not allowed, that they haven't had the opportunity to express them and develop them. So creating that opportunity is great for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you. No, it's been a really fantastic conversation. And as somebody who always worked with people who didn't feel like they belonged, and for someone like myself, who I then realized later I was exactly that, it's an incredible feeling to take that pressure off yourself, because the pressure's incredible, and it just brings an ease and flow in your life. And that's what I want for people, is to see their value and to live their life, as they wish, not boxed in this expansive life of possibilities.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, and thank you everyone in the show, in the audience, for watching or listening. It really is your support that makes this possible. Otherwise, this is just an excuse for me to talk to interesting and wonderful people. So please do get in touch with Victoria or with me if you'd like to continue the conversation in any way, and also share this with anyone you think might be interested, and share how you feel about it and how you think about it as well. There are upcoming and past episodes available on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can find the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. If you search for Delightful Dissent, though at time of recording, those are somewhat out of date, and I'm still dealing with the technical issues to catch that up. That is still ongoing. So at some point, hopefully soon, we will be able to bring all of the past episodes into the podcast platforms as well. The next episode, I'm going to be talking to Sarah Weiler, who is a leadership coach, quitting expert, and creative space holder. And we are going to be talking about the idea that you should get a proper job. I think it fits so neatly with this one, talk about categories and getting stuck in category, and this idea of your perfect job. And, it feels so similar to the kind of, to what we've been exploring today. And despite this kind of, the great quitting I keep hearing about, there's still tons of pressure to get a normal job, and a straightforward career that other people understand and you can describe in a single word. So many people who don't follow this path have had that experience of being at a social event and being like, well, what do you do? And struggling to answer that question. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting to explore this, and this, how we can do success and happiness on our own terms instead of having to fit into someone else's idea of how things happen. And I had a wonderful conversation with Sarah for her podcast. So I'm really looking forward to this one. And the show, as the show is recorded every couple of weeks, and this one will be coming up at 5 p.m. UK time, so slightly later in the day on Thursday, June the 9th. I hope to see you then, but in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thank you and goodbye.